Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to see you all join this webinar focusing on the topic of invigorative instruction to engage and advance young learners with severe and multiple disabilities. I am Padmaja Sarathy. I'm an author and an educational consultant, and I'm most grateful to AbleNet University for hosting this webinar and such an important topic. I'm again, thank you all for joining this webinar. Again, I don't know why, but the poll is not showing up. Looks like
it did show up, Padmaja.
Okay, it did. Okay, there seems to be almost an equal number of occupational physical therapists, parents, special education teachers, and language pathologists. We have a combination of people who have joined us. Welcome, all of you. I know many of you may be interested in this topic because it is quite a complex type of issue. Okay, what are we going to be talking about today? Children with severe and multiple disabilities, they may have significant areas of difficulty in cognition, communication, physical and sensory impairments they may have, and they may also exhibit some behavioral challenges. So they do require instructional delivery that maximizes their learning opportunities and minimizes the barriers to attain learning outcomes. And this is not a homogeneous population, and you would have diversity of needs, strengths, preferences, and interests that these children exhibit. And what we're going to be doing in this webinar 1 and 2, you will learn specific strategies and steps and a variety of adaptation tools to how to help children to gain and sustain their learning through increasing their attention, increasing their motivation, increasing their interaction with people and objects and concepts. And also, finally, to lead to meaningful academic and life outcomes, functional outcomes. We will, I will demonstrate through these 2 webinars how to use multisensory techniques, how do you use student-specific personalized adaptations, and a few assistive technology tools. As the slide indicates, the first session, today's session, will have an academic focus to increase cognitive and communication strengths and literacy development of young learners. What I mean by young learners is early childhood, kindergarten level, and maybe the 1st and 2nd grades. And the second webinar will illustrate art and music and movement and drama and role play, using games to increase motivation, increase attention, increase self-control, and using those as the medium to increase functional outcomes and academic, cognitive, communication, and motor outcomes. And some of the things that will be creatively, if you craft your adaptations and craft your activities, you will be able to actively engage young learners, and that's what these 2 webinars will illustrate. And what are some typical learning characteristics that children with severe and multiple disabilities may exhibit? Not that all of the students, all of the children with severe and multiple disabilities will have the same kind of characteristic, but they may share some common characteristics, and they are also going to have some distinctive, individualized characteristic. And this is a fairly small population, about 1% of the special ed population. And some of the children may exhibit limited communication. They may have limited, minimal verbal responses, and some may exhibit their response through crying or vocalization or through body movement. Others may exhibit gestures, and some others may have a few words and may be able to use pointing gestures. Some of the students may exhibit physical disability and mobility issues, and they may or may not have the use of their arms, legs, or hands, and which in a way relates to their personal difficulty in terms of physical mobility, may cause personal care issues. And one of the major things when it comes to academic focus is we want good attention. And they may not always demonstrate attention span for sufficient periods of time in order to absorb a concept, and they may exhibit high levels of distractibility. And also, in order to be able to retain the concept and to be able to apply it to different situations, you need skills to generalize. And this may be another area of deficit in some of the children. And they may also have difficulty transferring information from one situation to another. And some of the children may engage in self-stimulatory behaviors and self-injurious behaviors. And they may have repetitive body movements or facial movements. And also this population may include children with visual impairment and auditory impairment. And in addition, they may have medical issues, and some of them may require tube feeding, and they may have tracheostomy tube, or they may experience having seizures. As I said before, this population does not represent a homogeneous population. And let's look at some 3 different examples. All of them qualify under this multiple disabilities. You may have a student who is able to enjoy and access computer games and may be able to play games, puzzles, etc., but may engage in a lot of echolalia, repeated self-talk, and may have very limited engagement with peers and adults, and may not engage in any kind of communication exchange, although may have a limited number of use of words, which they may not use it to engage with others. They may also, because they may not have any physical difficulties, pace around the room and may even walk out of the room sometimes, and may emphatically say no when you ask them to do things. And they may have difficulty following directions, even though they are able to sit for somewhat of an extended time and to play games on the computer. So you may have that kind of a student also with significant difficulties. You may have, on the other hand, another student who is highly motivated by people and eager to engage and may greet everyone with a hand wave if the hand mobility is not an issue, and he may even kind of approximately say the word hi, approximation of the word hi, and may use a combination of either words or gestures or occasional vocalization to communicate with others, and may be able to eat independently, may be able to grasp the spoon and feed himself, and also able to make choices consistently, especially when it comes to indicating preference for food or something like that, and while still using a wheelchair for mobility, may be able to operate. And these are based on my own personal experience visiting these classrooms and seeing students. And when I go for my consulting trips, I see a lot of students with variations of skill levels. And this particular student may be able to move his own wheelchair, operate his wheelchair independently and move around the room, but may require assistance in transferring from wheelchair to toilet and back. And you may have yet another student who has limited voluntary control of her arms and legs and hands, and her hand may be in a closed fist position, requiring adaptations to grasp objects, may communicate her excitement when she sees people or peers, adults, through body orientation, leaning forward, and vocalization, and maybe a smile, and will need G-tube feeding and require complete assistance with personal hygiene. And you may require, of course, naturally, an adult to move the wheelchair. So these are three different scenarios, all come under severe and multiple disabilities. So it is important to understand what their strengths are. How do we tap into their strengths and plan our adaptations, personalized supports in order to maximize their learning outcome and their participation? I want to share with you some of my publications so that you can understand where my knowledge comes from. And I'm particularly happy to share with you about two of my recent publication. One of them is an early childhood transition book. It's designed as a parent guide, but you can be used by professionals in order to help families to make the transition from early intervention to preschool to kindergarten. That came out in December. It's a second edition. And then the most recent publication, which came out a couple of weeks ago, it's a behavior guide that uses a prevent strategy. All prevention strategies, that's all evidence-based. That's the behavior guide. It's a quick reference guide. And there are several other books, Executive Function Guide, and a book for significant teachers of significant disabilities, and then the one book that is focused entirely on severe and multiple disabilities. Those are published by LRP and different public publishers. And I also have a STEM guide, a para-educator training guide, and an autism, a couple of publications on autism. Now, going back to students with severe and multiple disabilities, one of the first steps is to make sure we have a good understanding and grasp of the universal design for learning principles. So during the phase, before we begin instruction, we have to make sure the learning happens from the perspective of UDL, Universal Design for Learning. So in the lesson design phase, you make sure we are providing multiple ways to present the information, multiple ways we are representing the concepts. We also need to think in terms of how do we get that student to respond, especially if the student is not using words to communicate or the student has very limited vocabulary. How do we make sure the student responds to the concepts being taught? And the more important thing as part of this three major principles is how do we get that student to engage with what we are presenting? That is critical. We have to tap into their attention and grab that attention through motivating items. So for that, we need to make that instruction engaging and highly interactive with real and concrete items for students with severe and multiple disabilities. That will increase their active engagement. And then we need to provide an optimal level of challenge so that we are increasing their participation instead of having someone else do everything for them. That is one of the first things how do we make the student more independent, depend upon their own initiation abilities? How do we increase that initiation? So we do that through varying the demands, providing learner-specific adaptation that's personalized for the student, and incorporating mainstream and assistive technology aids. And if for some reason we are not able to get that student to perform that specific task completely independently, we have to examine and evaluate, are there ways that they can partially participate in that activity so that it is more meaningful than someone else completely doing the task for them. So let's think about what are some access adaptations, engagement adaptations, and action and expression adaptations, the three principles of universal design for learning. How do we make that environment accommodating for the student? How do we make those adjustments so that these young learners can participate in everyday routines and everyday instructional and recreational and functional activities? One of the first things I would recommend, because one of the things that I often see when I go into these classrooms is that the student with significant, severe, and multiple disabilities is kind of sitting away from the other students, and usually there is a para-educator sitting right next to, in very close proximity to the student. It may not happen in your classrooms, but it does happen. So can we make sure that these students with significant needs are sitting next to their peers and not away from their peers? And are we minimizing the adult proximity and the total prompting that sometimes we engage in? And for a student who has a tendency to pace around the room, can we make sure there is a kind of a designated, marked boundary and teach the student to stay within that boundary? Can we make sure that we reduce that visual overstimulation in the room so that the student can focus on a few things and not be overstimulated by all of those things on the walls? The second aspect of increasing access, engagement, action, and expression is to provide materials and instructional supports during instruction, during the activities, during the routines to increase their participation. Using multisensory techniques, using the touch and the smell and the tactile element, the visual, the auditory, a combination of them. Increase the amount of concrete representational items to pair with the concepts that we are teaching. Can we try to use these things to build their concept knowledge and weave in movement, role play, and music, and I will elaborate on these things in the next webinar, in order to sustain attention, in order to increase their motivation. Alert them with pictures and songs during transition so that they are kind of being prepared but also achieve smooth transition. And when we do a word bank or when we have a word wall, can we pair them with pictures, photos, and if possible for students with severe and multiple disability, some concrete objects, and may even have a few of the essential vocabulary associated with a lesson paired with objects and go over it on a daily basis. And then further, offer personalized adaptation. Offer multiple opportunities for the student to communicate using choice-making. Consistent use of voice output devices, SGD, so that they have and of course it requires training and consistent use and in a variety of contexts, even when we are going outside for recess. And then using slant boards or eye gaze boards And then one of the simplest techniques in order to grab the child's attention is tap on the slant board and to get that attention. And then on top of that, if you use a flashlight to focus on the item, okay? They are making a choice between what is the major event in the story. Then is this the tree, or is this the boy? Is this the apple, or is this the banana? So kind of using a flashlight to bring their attention and to focus their attention. These are all some personalized adaptations, and I will have some pictures in the slides that are coming up. And some of the important points to remember when we are building cognitive, communication, and social skills for students with severe and multiple disabilities, we want to use intensive, intentional, and incidental teaching. What do I mean by intensive? When we are providing instruction for the whole group, and then we are following it up with instruction on a one-on-one, and we are making sure that instruction is intensive. It combines systematic instruction. It combines that immediate error correction. So when the student is making an error and you are asking the child to make a choice about the book that you have just read, and they're making, immediately stop that incorrect response and guide the student to the correct response, and then practice it over and over again on a one-on-one setting. Intentionally teaching, providing adaptation, and then taking advantage of incidental opportunities. Okay, you are going outside. Before going outside, shows us object that is associated with the outside. Are we going outside for recess? Are we going to play? Or are we going to eat lunch? So they are making a choice. And daily, if it happens at a certain time, they are making that connection with that object that represents the outside play. Maybe a little ball to represent outside play versus a spoon for going to the cafeteria for lunch or something. Or if they're going to have snack time in the classroom, some kind of a cracker or something. So we are building, through using these tools, their concept knowledge, and it is built in throughout the day. And you increase their vocabulary, you increase their communication, you are increasing their empowerment through choice making. And also, one of the things is to have a peer actually guide them through some of these things after the teacher has guided or the paraeducator has guided, so that the peer acts as a kind of a peer mentor, peer mediated intervention. And one of the things we do need to, if the student is having a tantrum, let's say the student is pacing around the room and you ask the student to come back and sit, and that is not the time to teach. That is a difficult time. The only thing is you can show a picture for the student to return back to her or his seat. And the other thing that's very easy actually in the kindergarten, early childhood, and the early elementary classrooms is to have a kind of an interactive learning center with multisensory features. Let's say you are presenting a story. You can have items associated with that on that thing. And let's say you are doing a lesson on floating and sinking, the science concept. You can have some students go do that experiment, the students who are higher functioning do that experiment and have a kind of a 2-column chart where they are marking which items float and which items sink, whereas the student with severe and multiple disabilities can have, if they have the motor control, they can drop the object, they can look at the object, or if somebody gives it, the peer who is working with them, while they are charting in between, they can say, show the object, and the student grasps the object and drops it in the water and watch it go float or watch it sink. So there is a way we can use the peers, and both are challenged to the maximum level at their concept and cognitive level. And of course, we have to monitor the progress, and we have to teach, and we need lots and lots and lots of practice, and it is important to present information, limited amount of information, making progress, and then move to the next set of items. I think I accidentally skipped one slide. So how are some ways communication can occur in students? Some may use sign language, some may point, some may exchange picture exchange, some may communicate through their vocalization, and different vocalizations may indicate different things, and it is important as part of the assessment process to look for these things. How does the student communicate? Is the student using gestures? Is the student using pointing? Is the student holding the object that he or she wants to work with or play with? Is the student pushing the object away to indicate, I don't want this, I want this? Are they indicating it through their facial expression? Are they using eye gaze? And it is important to use the eye gaze board and place the concrete items or pictures, but I think it is important for a student with significant cognitive and communication difficulty to use representational concrete items as much as possible at the beginning stages of building vocabulary. Are they using head shake? Are they using body orientation, leaning forward? Are they being aided? All this we have to look at in order to assess and improve the communication opportunities. And based on that, then we have to develop a kind of a communication schedule. We have a student here, Jay. He is visually impaired with significant cognitive difficulties. So he is at the object level of communication. He uses occasional vocalization. He pulls, pushes, holds objects. What we want this communication for him to help with the function is to be able to make requests, to be able to greet, to be able to show interest in the lessons that are being taught. And we have to make sure these communication opportunities are provided throughout the day in all settings. And it may be helpful to have an object schedule with a limited number of items in the beginning, train the student to use those, and we can Velcro the objects on an object schedule and use it while going for recess, use it in the classroom, use it when you are going to the cafeteria. And let's say breakfast means holding a spoon inserted in his hand. Language, story time, math time, holding the book, holding the story prop, vocalizing to indicate his involvement, pressing an A, C device with Velcroed items, Velcroed concrete items to make a choice. And I Talk to a Communicator is one of those helpful tools to make choices and respond with touching and feeling objects and manipulatives. He will need, for this particular example, we will need spoons, maybe special book holder, and page turner, a story prop, math manipulatives, and of course, AAC device. And the support persons would be the teachers, the therapists, the paraeducators, and peers. And one of the things I do want to mention before I forget is it is important that the paraeducator who may be assigned to the student and who goes to the mainstream setting and the inclusive setting with that student has to be trained and coached in trying to get the student to do things as independently as possible. That is very, very important so that the student does not become adult dependent and totally prompt dependent. So for academic activities, some of the photos that you see here are adaptations that will help. The one on the top that you see is a page turner. you have, in order for the student to be able to turn the page, there is a paper clip, and behind that paper clip, attached on the other side of the paper clip, is like a foam packing material that's attached. You could also use a craft stick, Velcro it to the book page, and you can also use adapted book. You can create a book that's connected. You can also, some of the other adaptations that you see, the student to be able to make yes or no response, you can have a craft stick and they can have a happy, sad face, or you can have yes, no indicated, and then you can have a kind of a stamp that indicates the character in the story or an event in the story. I know I have put a foam canister, which is no longer being used. You can use any kind of a stamp. One of the things that is important is a slant board where there are two choices given and the student makes that choice. Who is the main character in the story? While you may ask the other student open-ended questions or ask them to describe what happened in the story, you may ask the student, point to the main character in the story. Was there a pig in the story? Or was the story about a spider? And you can also say, do you want to play a musical instrument, or do you want to do art if you're having centers? So again, you have two choices, and they're pointing or eye-gazing at that object associated with that activity. This is a carrot seed, is a story. It's a preschool story, but it can be used in the kindergarten setting too. The Carrot Seed by Ruth Krauss. And you can integrate the different senses into this planned language lesson, and that is appealing to all students, not just the student with significant needs. And they can see the book, they can see the pictures, they can listen to the book. You can have it programmed into a device. You can create a word wall, and you can attach objects. So the key words you can take. You can take actual carrot and put it in a Ziploc bag and attach it, and they learn to point to the carrot. You can put a seed in a little mini bag and attach it to the word wall, and they point to the seed. And in the beginning, maybe they are just pointing to the seed and pointing to the carrot. And then you build that vocabulary. We have a tendency to introduce maybe 20 words at the same time, and we go over those flashcards day after day after day, and still the student may have one or not even one word. So it is important to limit it to 2 or 3 words, let them conquer that. It's a conquest. And then we add 2 more and gradually increase the challenge. Ultimate goal is for them not necessarily to know every word, but to increase that vocabulary to at least a few words independently, recognizing those words or the photo or the picture or the object. And then, give opportunities to touch the book, turn the pages using a page turner, and engage in a planting activity to the maximum extent that they can do independently. And then combine it with visual, tactile, and kinesthetic. Hold and touch a carrot, and maybe make a student book that everybody is doing, and then the student with significant needs may add a picture to that, or may select a picture, and then smell and taste a carrot. And then one of the things we will look at next time is how do we add drama and role play, make it motivating, and give every student in the classroom an opportunity to play a role. They may have the same role. They may be the little boy who is planting the carrot seed, but many students have that role, and they have their script. It may be just one sentence. And for a student with significant needs, you may use an assistive SGD, speech-generating device, programmed for them to press and activate the device to be able to participate. And this is a story, for example. It can work on many different themes, as I have shown on that slide. And then we move on to another story, The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. And can you create graphic organizers and put it on your literacy table? This is at your learning center. And then one student may identify all the things that you get out of the tree, and they may identify fruits and flowers and leaves and seeds and all that. And your student with severe multiple disability may touch the object, may point to one thing that the tree gives, or make a choice, may have a little choice board that says we get flowers or fruit or something from the tree, but we do not get, a car from the tree or a bus from the tree, something totally inappropriate, so that they make that choice because they have seen this graphic organizer. And you can use this story map organizer on your display board and then have concrete items attached to your word wall, and as they line up to go outside, you have the opportunity to touch the object, identify the object, match it to the vocabulary that is associated with those objects. And also, during your instruction, you use the story map organizer to identify the events, the characters in the story, the theme of the story, and that helps all students, but it has a particular appeal to increase the motivation and the attention and focus of students with significant needs. And this is an adapted book page, and in that you have that picture, and you can actually attach a small, tiny apple and the beginning to show what an apple looks like, and the word apple, what does it mean? And then you say touch an apple, and you can create just an adapted book with 4 or 5 pages. And when you're working one-on-one with the student, use the adapted book, which will reinforce the vocabulary that you are displaying on the word wall, that you have illustrated during your group lesson, and that way at the end of a certain period, depending on the student's cognitive and communication level, would have acquired some vocabulary and concepts associated with that. So what are some child-specific adaptations? Of course, one of the first things I can think of, how do we use the assistive technology, the speech-generating voice output devices with words and sentences from the story? And when you have a story that has a lot of repeated phrases, like chicka chicka boom boom, is there any room? And you can have that. Or, uh-oh, the carrot is not going to come up. So if you have those repeated phrases programmed into the device, during your group instruction, the student who has communication difficulties can activate the device to be part of the group, while the other students may be able to answer questions and engage in a back and forth interaction and communication. Your student with severe disabilities activates the device. Familiarize your students with all the materials associated with that lesson. And it is important to position the student. Let's say all the students are sitting on the floor on a mat in an early childhood or a kindergarten classroom. Make sure that the student with motor difficulty who is using a wheelchair is not sitting in the wheelchair but has a special seating device, seating equipment to be able to sit along with the peers. And this is where your physical therapist and occupational therapist can provide help. And they can come up with the seating equipment for the student to be able to see at the same eye level as some of the other students and not be separated into a wheelchair. If at all possible, that is something you want to explore. And that also increases the impact on the other students feel that this student is also part of the group. And that also helps anybody walking into the room to think, okay, this student is part of this instructional setting, part of the group, can participate. So, and then next thing is to stabilize the materials. One of the things that happens when they are sitting in around the table, and this may be for a student who may or may not be using wheelchair, and they are sitting around the table and they are using the table and they are writing on the table or they are drawing on the table, it is important to make sure, as a matter of fact, this student that I observed was sitting in a wheelchair and the table was at the right height and the wheelchair was at a lower level. She was able to use the table, but the material that she was using, the eye gaze board was continuously moving. If only they had used a Dyson mat to stabilize that, it will not move. And this applies also for those young children who are trying to draw on a piece of paper on the table and it is continuously moving and they are not able to adjust. You can either put a Dyson mat and then put that paper on top of that, or at least attach it with tape if you don't have a Dyson mat. It's a kind of, usually it's available in different kinds of colors. It's like a rubber mat. So that's something. And you can use the same thing on any kind of surface where the object or the paper moves. The same way you can use an adaptive grip for the student to be able to grasp the object. You can have a wrist-attached adaptive grip, or you can Velcro a glove. If the student has a closed fist, you can use a Velcro glove. I will show you some examples, and then you can put Velcro on that, and then the student can see the picture or see the object, visually gaze at the object. And of course, as I already said, we can make sure that we have AT device, and when you have a story you are displaying at your learning center, make sure you have an AT device programmed with that story. And it is important for all of the students to have a way to respond and participate during group instruction. It just requires some personalized adaptations. So these are some examples, like this is for math. You are using a sorting tray, and you are teaching counting. Present a variety of concrete objects. You know, the student may use the eye gaze, touch, point, use bean bags, use spoons, use straws, use pennies, use cups. If the student, you are worried about the student putting the object in then don't use pennies, use cups. You may want to use plastic spoons, and then they are matching the numeral with that object. And try to use student preferred objects so that the motivation increases. And then instead of asking them to count 10 objects and continuously making errors, it is important that you use only 3 or 4 or begin with even 2. Give me 2. And if they continuously make errors and keep giving on more than 2, immediately stop before they practice those errors over and over again. Because when they practice a response that is incorrect, it causes confusion for the student. So immediately stop before they begin to give you the third and the fourth object. No. Give me 2. This is 2. Show immediately what is 2. 1, 2. So it is important also when you are doing instruction that it intensive instruction and personalized instruction for that student at that student level. And certainly objects, concrete objects, help build that concept. So how do we enhance motivation to build their attention? For example, you will see number 1, 2, 3. There, they are feeling the object. They can hear because these are mini jingle bells. They can hear the object, especially valuable for a student who is visually impaired. And they get to feel and touch and count the object. Then you also use assistive technology. Those are WikiStick numbers. You can use WikiStick so that they can feel, and this is particularly helpful for students with visual impairment. But the tactile sense will help students with communication difficulties, with cognitive difficulties. And because the tactile adds an immediate feeling, immediate concept understanding. So use that as much as possible. I know teachers are constantly challenged by so much of paperwork and data collections and all that. But in the long run, these adaptations will help the student to make progress. And year after year, you will not have the same IEP objectives. You will see considerable progress when you provide these adaptations. Again, math aided with technology supports, math aided with some touch items. Playing a game, and in playing a game, you can use the AbleNet's alternate spinner, and that helps group participation. And your student, all they have to do is to press the switch in order to have the alternate. And then it stops at a number, and then they try to find the matching number, or they try to find items to match that, and you may have another student who is a peer who is also participating, and they may be the one who will count that number of objects and give it to the peer with severe disabilities, and they get to see that object, but they get to press the device in order to make it turn. And then, of course, you have these super talker and quick talker that will help promote communication, that will help promote group participation. So there are a variety of tools that you can use, but the most important thing here I want to mention is how do we enable group participation and include that student with severe and multiple disabilities in that group. So some of the learning objectives for language and math would be to be able to attend to the story, increase that attendance, let's say, from 30 seconds to gradually to 5 minutes, to be able to point to the picture or the object associated with a story. Use a communication signal to request, do you want this puppet that goes with the story, or do you want the other puppet that goes with the story? Or maybe choose a picture. To be able to carry out two-step direction associated. These are all some of the learning objectives. Count objects, and then, as I said, limit it in the beginning to 1 to 2, and then increase it to 5. And associating a clock with a routine activity. The day of the week. When we are doing the day of the week, you can have an adapted calendar and have an object associated with that particular day of the week. Monday is library day, and then maybe have a picture or a small mini book attached so that they know that it's Monday. And follow a sequence of 3 to 5 daily routine activities. And moving on to another area of interest, which can be quite exciting, and sometimes we think that students with severe and multiple disabilities cannot get involved in science concept, but they can, and it is just the adaptation. Let's say the simple story, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, very popular Eric Carle's book, but it teaches such a beautiful concept of the evolution from an egg to a butterfly. Shows the life cycle. How do we use foam and felt items for them to feel and touch and to understand? It is possible that while your student in kindergarten is able to completely put them in the right order from the egg to the caterpillar, to the pupa, to the butterfly. Your student with severe and multiple disabilities may be able to identify the butterfly from a spider. Touch the butterfly or point to the butterfly or eye gaze at the butterfly. That is the main character that is emerging out of this particular story. Or it may be, which is the butterfly, which is the caterpillar. What happens to the caterpillar becomes a butterfly. So different ways you can, and they can eye gaze and get involved and touch and feel. So let's look at some example. The student has cerebral palsy, has limited voluntary control of her arms and legs. She uses directed eye gaze to indicate what she wants. She loves the company of her peers, and that's a strength. So it is important to use some peer-mediated intervention to help her to connect with her peers. She engages with a smile. She is learning to use object-based communication system, and she is trying to make choices during circle time, story time, and centers and snack time. She makes a choice, let's say, during centers between art activity or to play with blocks. This OTPT and the speech can play a significant role in setting up. In this case, they are working on a chin switch by the slight movement of her head, and so that she can use battery-operated toys and communication devices. So what are some things? Attach items to a mini board or a slant board, using a flashlight to gain her attention to focus on the item that we are trying to teach her, or to focus on the item, the two items, one after another, that we want her to make a choice from. She activates a pre-programmed device during story time to repeat phrases, to make requests, to make choice during centers. Snack time, do you want to sit next to Robert, or do you want to sit next to Samantha? Do you want to pass out the crackers, or do you want to pass out the juice? And she may have another peer helper helping her. So, and using an adapted cuff and attaching objects to the adapted cuff. And of course, you will need the guidance from OTPT, the therapist, and you will also coach the peers, train the peers to work with her, to help her, so that it promotes the independent response as well as social interaction. What are some sample goals that you can? You want to improve her functional communication. You want to be able to improve her large and small motor control. You want to be able to increase her attending and listening skills, let's say from 10 seconds to 30 seconds to a minute, and then gradually increasing it to 5 minutes. You want her social interaction with age peers. So what are some learning objectives you will focus on? Holding and grasping an object, recognizing cause-effect relationship, associating an object with a particular routine, snack time, then maybe a spoon or eating or a little plate or a napkin, and making a clear choice, given maybe 2 choices in the beginning and then increasing it to 3, and attending and engaging in activity for 3 to 5 minutes. And you also need to provide group social skills coaching for her as well as for her peers. Teach all children social interaction skills in the context of activity, in the context of play themes. We have a tendency sometimes for an adult to sit and do every move for the child with severe and multiple disability. Let's position her in such a way that she is in eye contact with all of the others, and also teach the peers to work with her. For example, if you go out to recess and the student is sitting in a wheelchair and is not able to participate, can you maybe take some object that will be attractive to the student the target student, as well as maybe entice the attention of the others so that they will come to the student and maybe they do something together. And another student may come in because one student has come to see what's going on. What is it that she has on the wheelchair tray? So these are all through play. They will learn to interact with others and also to learn about the world around them. And so teach socially competent peers the skills needed to initiate interactions with those with limited social skills. Give time and attention when they are playing together. Oh, I like the way you're playing with Anna. Oh, that's great. Anna, oh, you are really working very nicely with Sam. And make this kind of positive so that behavior is repeated again and again when they are working during centers or other times. And position them and teach the children with autism, especially the skills needed to play and interact with others. And ask yourself, check, are you breaking the complex task into smaller parts? That's very, very important. While one student is able to completely understand the concept of the story, you may want to take one element. Okay, the tree gave the apples to the boy. The concept of apple being a fruit, that's a snack. So you understand that concept. That's all it may be from that particular story. Presenting different tasks to meet different student needs. As I mentioned, you may ask to make a choice between two characters in the story, or you may limit the task to giving you two items. It may be pointing to the red apple or the green apple, whereas the other students may say, what are all the different things that the boy asked the tree? What are all the different things? Did the tree give everything that the boy asked for? So in a kind of even problem-solving question, here you may limit it to some very literal choice-making type of questions and provide just sufficient amount of cues and prompts without completely doing the task for the student. Highlighting the text, attaching an object to the text. Make sure that the prompts are gradually faded. And also it is important to mention here that we do have a tendency sometimes to over-prompt and continue the same prompt. Try to see if you can gradually fade those prompts from completely hand-over-hand prompt to gesture prompt. For example, instead of using hand-over-hand prompting, can you try and use hand-under-hand prompt? And this is particularly true for young children if they are encouraged to use, when you use hand-under-hand prompt, it helps the student to make more initiation, more involvement in the activity. And the coach, the paraeducator, as I said before, to promote the student's self-dependence and train the student to activate the device rather than the paraeducator activating this device. Instead of the paraeducator pulling the picture out, see if the student can eye gaze or touch, or the student has, let's say, both hands a glove and you are attaching the picture or the photo or the object. Can the student look from one hand to the other and make the choice? These are all other visual tools. You can make a book attached with concrete items. You can make a kind of a wall to build knowledge, but this is, of course, a Venn diagram, and you are teaching differences and similarities and attaching objects to identify the difference and similarity. Here, it's a magnet activity that you could put at your learning center with objects attached. And choice making is a powerful tool, and it will vary from child to child and depends on the child's functioning level, cognitive level, and communication level. But consider what kind of choices can you offer? And can you offer within an activity? Can you offer between two or more activities? Can you offer activities, say, during playtime or free time? Can they make the choice? Can they make a choice between two books when they go to the library? Can they make a choice between two different sensory activities? Which task do they want to do first? Do they want to go to the art center first, or do they want to go to the block center? Do they want to finish their math first, and then if they're working independently one-on-one, do they want to do their math first or their vocabulary first? Give them choice. That's very empowering, and also you are indirectly gaining the student's attentional and behavioral control. And these are some recommended practices. I know I'm going over time a little bit, but we started a few minutes later. So present information in a flexible manner for the student. Finally, as I said at the beginning, for the learner to access, respond, and engage in the activities. And of course, the response is not going to be always verbal response. We have looked at different ways the student can respond. Make sure the student has a means to communicate. Make sure the student has an opportunity to make choices and indicate preferences. Connect the learner with the learning. Look for different ways. Allow for the student whatever skills the student can do independently or partially without adult assistance. Make that happen. Avoid prompt dependence. Because when they become totally adult-dependent or prompt-dependent, it encourages learner helplessness. They would rather let the other person do the task for them than initiating or taking responsibility or doing the task themselves. It helps them to exert more power and control over the environment. And it improves the quality of life and leads to meaningful life outcomes, functional outcomes for the student. And of course, it reduces, and ultimately our goal for students with severe and multiple disabilities is to reduce that dependence on the adult. So begin with the end in mind. How will this activity or adaptation and support prepare the student to be more independent? How can you broaden his world or her world? How can you build a positive perception about the learner? That is extremely important, both from peers and from the adults. And it is important for you to also work with the family. And I'm glad many parents have joined this webinar. Please work with them so that they can continue this self-dependence, partial participation, or full participation at home as well, with many different functional activities at home. How can you facilitate interaction with typical peers during group instruction? What instructional activities will enable the student to gain self-dependence and control over them? Finally, if someone does not expect somebody to do something or is not expected to achieve anything, then they never will. If we act as if students can do something, they just might be able to. So develop an expectation of performance, however limited they may be. Make sure we, as educators, compensate for those limitations with creative adaptations and personalized supports. And I have listed a number of resources in these next two slides that you will have access to with the handout that you can get from AbleNet. We'll be sending it to you. And I want to thank AbleNet first for hosting this, AbleNet University for hosting this webinar. A great many thanks to them, and great many thanks to all of you who are joining this webinar today. And let's go forth and conquer and make every child with severe and multiple disabilities advance in their life outcomes.